and welcome. My name is Erin McCluskey. I'm the Public Education Manager here at Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. Tonight's program is in support of the National Design Triennial, Why Design Now?, on view through January 9th, 2011. I'd like to thank GE for their invaluable support of this exhibit and related programs. I'd also like to thank Agnes Born, the Modrian Foundation, and all of the other exhibit sponsors and partners, including the Norwegian Consulate General in New York, the Ministry of Cultural Denmark, and the Consulate General of Finland. This program will be recorded and can be viewed on our website, along with other past programs at cooperhewitt.org. We have great programs coming up next month, including a two-part Nordic Design Now, a program on innovative material use, an opportunity to see the tangible earth for the first time in the US, and Alberto Alessi in conversation with Bill Mogridge, our director. Please visit our events calendar on our website to see more and also to register. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our two speakers tonight, both of whom are providing real opportunities for designers to research, locate, source, and commit to using sustainable materials and textiles in their work. Summer Rayne Oakes is the founder of SRO LLC, a strategic sustainability consulting firm, and the co-founder CEO of Source for Style, a B2B marketplace that allows designers, both fashion and interior, to search, compare, and purchase more sustainable materials from around the world. Tone Tobiasson co-founded NICE Nordic Initiative Clean Ethical in 2008 and launched a website, a code of conduct, and a fashion summit, among other projects, which we'll hear about tonight. The aim of nicefashion.org is to be accessible and inspirational enough to move the industry and consumers towards both sustainable production and consumption. Please join me in welcoming Tone and Summer. Thank you.
Now, can you hear me? And how close do I have to be to the mic? Is this close enough? So I don't, I'm tall, so that might be a problem. Well, I'm here to talk about nice fashion, which has been my sort of pet peeve for the last couple of years, and been really fun to work with. I work with Oslo Fashion Week magazine as one of my other projects, which is why I have the OFW up there. But I'm going to take you through a little bit of the history of nice fashion. It started out more or less as just a conversation. This was back in 2007, actually, and I was talking with the then Minister for Children and Equality in Norway, who was also known as the Minister of Dresses, because she likes to dress up when they go to red carpet events. And she was saying that she would like to help the Norwegian fashion business on and up into the world, because, as you may know, it is mostly Danish and Swedish fashion that is known worldwide. H&M, I'm sure you've all heard of. Norwegian fashion is not really a big issue when it comes to being a worldwide attention getter. But the next day I was having lunch with the head of Oslo Fashion Week, and I said, we have a minister now who wants to help out. Isn't this fantastic? And he said, oh, those politicians, they're always saying, sweet promises, will help. I'm so sick of this, but what we really need to look into is how things are made. I'm so sick of looking at labels and getting no information whatsoever except made in China and how to wash it. And I said, well, that can't be a big problem for Norwegian designers. All they have to do is handwrite a note. I mean, their production is so small anyway. And we looked at each other and said, maybe we have an idea here. And so we started out as the Norwegian Initiative Clean and Ethical. And I sort of had in the back of my mind that we could change the Norwegian into Nordic. And because we were at that point discussing an event that was going to be happening in Riga with the Danish Fashion Institute, with the Swedish Fashion Council, with the Icelandic Fashion Council, and with Helsinki Design Week, we sort of floated the idea about a Nordic cooperation. And they all liked the name NICE, and they all liked the idea of cooperating, so presto. 2008, we joined forces, Nordic Fashion Association, and NICE became a Nordic project, and was launched then in the City Hall in Copenhagen that summer, which was really fantastic for us. It was sort of like going from playing around with an idea in Oslo and then suddenly having a big media event in Copenhagen in the City Hall. After all, where one of the top political guys was talking about nice as if everyone had heard about it before, and I was like, that's interesting. Actually, in December 2009, there was a big fashion summit then in Copenhagen, where the Crown Princess Mary also spoke about nice as if everybody knew what it was, and said how important it was to work with these issues. And we had a really interesting panel of who spoke to the audience, which was in Copenhagen Opera House. Among others, Julie Gillard from Barney's, who I know has been here talking about sustainable fashion issues. And there was also a design competition where the Nordic designers, we chose from a pool of all of them in all the countries, but we wanted new gen designers. So 5 designers were picked from all of the Nordic countries, and they got to design 2 outfits each that they showed here for the audience. And as you see, this is not boring, sustainable clothing. This is exciting clothing, which was done in cooperation with CLASS, which stands for Creativity, Lifestyle, and Sustainable Synergy. You may know this organization because I know they have an office here in New York. They're originally Italian, and their whole thing is sourcing sustainable materials. They did a workshop then with the Nordic designers to really show them how one can find exciting new textiles and materials made from crab shells or whatever, milk fibers, and really do interesting fashion that people think is worthwhile to look at on a catwalk. We've been building our collaborations and people we were working with. So we just actually announced a strategic alliance with the Right Group, which stands for Reducing the Impact of Textiles on the Environment, which is a British organization. They are very, very active in Britain and a really good group of people, and they just arranged the Right Conference in London, where this strategic alliance was announced. And we also work a lot with DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the UK. They have a series of roadmaps where they work with different projects, one being clothing. And so we're on their committee there, looking at all sorts of different actions that we can collaborate on. And this is part of our whole philosophy is making these alliances and working with different groups. So we have the Ethical Fashion Forum Network that we also cooperate with. Cotton Made in Africa is also another interesting group that we've been talking to. I went to Hong Kong to Planet Textiles, and you see all these self-satisfied people who have just spoken about how sustainable they are and how happy they are with the situation. So, but it's always an interesting platform then to meet these people and get new alliances going, among others GIGA, which I'm sure you haven't heard of. It stands for Green Ideas, Green Actions, and it's actually a Chinese organization, which is backed partly by the EPEA, which is the Environmental Protection Encouragement Agency, and also the Chinese government. And they have been working mostly with architecture and that type of design so far. Now they really want to get into textiles because they want Chinese designers and the Chinese industry to really look into these issues. And their next big issue is textiles. So we're talking to them and trying to find ways of cooperating. We have plans actually for Riga again. Next week there'll be a representative from NICE there to talk to the Eastern European countries about sustainable issues. Also, St. Petersburg wants us to come there and talk to the Russian contingency of the fashion industry, because this is a totally new area for them. They have no thoughts whatsoever about sustainable issues in this part of the world. It's like, what are you talking about, sustainable? We're just trying to sell stuff. Once you start talking to them, they're really seeing the new aspect of it. And going to St. Petersburg and talking to actually the Russian industry is going to be very exciting. Of course, things have changed a lot in the last 5 6 years. 5 or 6 years ago, we were at the same level that the Russians and the Eastern Europeans are now. What is this sustainable stuff you're talking about? This is where we are today. Everybody has a new sort of label. I just read in a newsletter from Eco-Textile News now that the amount of labels that are out there is reaching a level where it's almost comical, because you just can't tell the difference. You don't know, and you know what are all these labels? I'm sure you can maybe recognize a few of them, but far from all of them. One of them doesn't even exist today. The leaf one is a future project where somebody is trying to organize almost, both the ethical issues and the environmental issues into one label, because that's been part of the problem, that the ethical issues have been on the one hand and the environmental issues on the other one. All the ethical people have been saying, well, everything that has to do with ethics is also an environmental issue. And the environmental people have been saying, well, actually, everything that has to do with the environment is also ethics. But they never sort of were able to mesh these things together. But there are actually people trying to do that now, and they've been trying for about 3 years, and they still haven't gotten going on that label. It has a lot to do with the fact that comparing different things, when one is talking about what is the most sustainable thing to do, what is the most ethical thing to do, is very complicated. And I don't know if you've heard about ecometrics, but it's a guy called Phil Patterson who has his Color Connections company in England, and he's part of the Right Group. And he has worked for Marks & Spencer for 10 years with all the issues around dyeing, all the issues around processing, and he did the math. He put in a whole calculating system about different dyeing methods, different ways of processing materials, and you can go in on his ecometric site, and you can plug in, especially if you're a producer or a manufacturer of clothing, the information into it, and it gives you environmental damage units. That's EDUs. Having the lowest score there is, of course, the best. Having the highest score, not so good. And you can also go in and do one for your own closet, which is always very depressing. And that's for free. The ecometrics you have to sign up for. And he's found out that it's a little bit too complicated for small companies, for design students, so he's working on a version that will be more accessible for smaller companies and design students, but it's not up and running yet. But it's interesting to see how people are now trying to develop methods of comparing apples and oranges. And the outdoor group, the European one, is now working with the American one, and they've had a couple of webinars now with their Eco Index, where they're looking at how to measure outdoor equipment, outdoor clothing, and have different parameters on how to measure this. And it's still in the beta version, so it's not open for use yet. But people can actually go in and volunteer to be part of this. And it's very fun to do their webinars because they're very instructive, and it tells a lot about their philosophy, of course, of what is important, what actually counts in this big piece of math, because they also give points. By the way, that's not going to be open to the public as a judgment to say that this company is better than that. They want it to be internal so the companies can improve what they're doing. But you have something that has been made public and available, which was Made By, who did an assessment on where they did an overall ranking on different textiles and materials and how they judged them. And I know that the wool people were very depressed, because as you can see, wool ended up with conventional cotton in the red zone there. While, of course, the A group was recycled cotton, recycled nylon, recycled polyester, organic hemp, organic flax, while along with, in the really horrible group there, we have conventional cotton, virgin nylon, rayon, I can't read, and generic viscose. And there has been a lot of criticism, of course, of this ranking, because it turned out that what they did do was judge the fiber up until spinning, and nothing after that. And we all know that a lot happens to textiles after that phase. For example, in the consumer phase, we wash different textiles very differently. We treat them very differently. And this is a study that was just finished in Norway, where you're looking at how much energy consumption is involved in washing different garments. Of course, here wool is winning hands down as compared to especially cotton. And there, it doesn't make a difference whether the cotton is organic or conventional, of course. You'll wash it just as much, no matter what. One of the projects that we've taken hold of in the NICE group is actually looking at wool, looking more closely. The reason being that in the Nordic region, there is a lot of wool use. And I'm going to give a presentation in Manchester next week, which is why this is the opening slide for that, which is why the date's there in the town. Traditionally in Norway, even the Prime Minister, our ex-Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland, wore a lot of wool sweaters in her work situation, because that was part of the sort of saying you're one of the people there. You sit there with your wool sweater and look very... we actually also, when we did this presentation in Paris, showed our financial minister sitting there in his office explaining the budget in a wool sweater, and said, you know, this is our financial minister, usual day at the job. And most of the men who were watching the presentation were all wearing gray suits, and they were a little shocked that somebody would go to the office wearing a sweater like that. But it seems to be the fashion this fall, though. So I don't know if you've seen D&G's catwalk for fall/winter 2010, which was looked like they'd walked out of a Norwegian hand knitting store. Actually, I think they, when being inspired, probably went back to Per Spook, who was a haute couture Norwegian designer back in the 80s, and he actually did a haute couture collection with these traditional patterns, which is shocking enough in itself. I don't know how often they show up at a haute couture show. But the trickle-down effect on especially this collection has been enormous, because I saw that the British chain Tesco, among others, which is cheapo, they had copied exactly the D&G collection. Another thing with, especially Norwegians, is that we wear wool traditional costumes. And they're wool embroidery on wool textiles, and we wear them at formal occasions. If there's a formal dinner at the Royal Palace, a lot of the women politicians will wear their traditional costume, because then the tabloids can't give them grades on how well dressed they are. You know, very easy way to get out of being graded on your gala dress. But these, the thing here is that these wool traditional costumes, which most, if you ask any Norwegian, would say, oh, they're made from Norwegian wool. They're not. As you can see from these statistics, most of the wool today that is from sheep in Norway is actually exported and becomes wall-to-wall carpeting in Britain. We all know what the British do with their wall-to-wall carpeting. They put it in the bathroom. So that's where Norwegian wool ends up, and most of the wool is imported. So the way the Norwegian companies who sell wool get around this is worn by Norwegians, since whatever, it's not made from Norwegian wool, it's worn by Norwegians. And the fun little thing you have at the bottom there, Viking wool from Norway, is the carpet producers in Britain. That's how they label it. If you do not dress your kids in wool underwear in Norway, you're mistreating them. Seriously. Norwegian kids are dressed in wool underwear. It's so easy, you know, send them to the kindergarten, they just have their outdoor sort of suit on. As soon as they go inside, they take it off and they play in the wool underwear. Don't have to think about anything. Of course, the grown-ups wear it too, especially for sports, as you can see from the ex-sports star up on the right-hand corner there, who sells the really colorful underwear. But of course, this wool is also not from Norwegian sheep. It's from merinos. Cute little merinos there. These are the sheep that give you the softest wool, and they all listen to Norah Jones, we were told. That's how it ends up so soft. But seriously, actually, this type of treating your sheep where they can go out in the open and eat, grass and live in nature produces coarse wool. There's no way around it. This type of sheep who lives in areas where there's a lot of drought produces hunger fine wool, which is the finest merino. The even finer one has to sit and listen to Norah Jones. But this gives you a little bit of an idea that things have become so specialized, so that this merino sheep, you see how it folds in and out and in and out, and you might have heard about the mulazing, which is quite a problem when it comes to merino wool in Australia, and that is because of these folds, where the fly strike gets into these folds and they have to cut off the actual skin of the animal. So these animals are just more freaks of nature now than anything else, and they're going to have to breed them back so that they actually produce less wool in order to rectify the problem. But the whole truth has been that you cannot use locally sourced wool either in America or in Europe because it is too coarse. So it's only Australian and it's New Zealand wool that is soft enough. Well, that truth is changing a little bit. These are all examples of companies who've started using more local wool in the UK and are actually doing really well. And Finisterre has found one little breed where they found 40-some animals that were about to become extinct, and they now have 150 or so animals. And they now have enough to actually produce underwear in the finest wool for surfers. And this type of storytelling is the new thing that's going on in the wool world, is finding this locally forgotten even breeds that you can start working with and make fantastic wool products from. Because the truth is not that local wool has to be wasted, which I don't know if you heard about His Royal Highness Prince Charles' wool campaign in the UK. It's going to be rolled out here next year, so you'll hear about it then anyway. But he started this whole wool campaign because he found out that his farmers were just sharing the wool and destroying it because they couldn't sell it. They didn't get enough money for it, and there was no use for it. Some is even burned, but most of it is just destroyed. And he thought this was horrible, so he started the wool campaign. The ironic thing about the wool campaign is so much of the money for it comes from the Australian wool innovation, so that they're sort of not too concerned about that part of it anymore, but they want everybody to start, of course, wearing more wool. And in Norway, some designers have been playing around with this idea for a while. We have our two fun guys, Arne and Carlos, who live on the rundown station building way up in the mountains in Norway, who are favorites of Ray Kawakubo and Lee Edelcourt, actually. And they do a lot of fun things with knitting, and especially hand knitting, and making recipes with cool designs that they sell with the actual wool, so that you are co-designing, or at least knitting their fantastic design. Which goes also to, of course, how you feel about what you're doing. These are the Norwegian designers who've been working with wool, producing things locally, with local wool, but also at local factories. Local is the new organic. We've been discussing this a lot with the International Wool Textile Organization, who have seen just wool go down, 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 down on the world market. It's about 2% of all textiles and fibers today are wool. But with the current fashion thing going on, I don't know if you've been noticing in the stores lately, but there's a lot of wool out there, and it's a lot of fun wool and a lot of chunky wool too. So we're actually discussing a lot with them about, because the whole thing that they found is that the one thing people really like about wool is it's a renewable resource. Grows out, you cut it. Grows out, you cut it. Keeps coming back, except for the woolless sheep, which is a new breed to sort of eliminate the problem with waste of wool. But the whole thought about wool being a renewable resource is interesting to look at also in a cradle-to-cradle perspective, because you can actually compost it at the end of its life. You can also think in technical systems when it comes to the whole cradle-to-cradle thinking, because you can take things apart from each other and use them over again, so that recycled wool is actually something that is done a lot in Prato district in Italy, where they take back old sweaters and make them into new. And we have, in the cradle-to-cradle system, of course, we already have a recyclable t-shirt made by Trigema that can be composted. So these thoughts are not new in any way, but looking at wool in this perspective is a little bit new. And that is one of the new phrases we've coined, I do that a lot, is renewable. So this is one of the projects that we're hoping to develop a little bit further, looking at the whole process. Not just the production, not just the dyeing, not just the those processes, but looking at the whole life cycle and bringing things back into a new life. We did a Cradle-to-Cradle workshop actually in Oslo with the Swedish designer Matilda Wendelbo. She told us that so far she's only been able to find textiles that are furniture textiles that are cradle certified. Her major problem, she says, is that, of course, there's zippers and buttons. Those are two problems, too, in this process. But take back. Because if you're going to do a cradle-to-cradle collection, you have to have a system of taking it back. Or you have to have a system of actually composting the materials. So her idea was making a passport that would accompany the collection, so that you would sort of keep track of the clothing. But I don't really see that happening. We all know what happens to instructions when we get instructions with something we buy. You put them in a drawer, you sort of forget. And when you throw them out, the instructions certainly don't follow the clothing. Which brings us into the other project we've been working on, which is textile waste as a resource. Because this is becoming an enormous problem. I don't know if you've ever been to one of those recycling places that the Salvation Army or whatever has. I've been to the one in Oslo, and they collect 17 tons of textiles every single day, just in the Oslo region. The Salvation Army in Norway is Fretex, by the way. And the Norwegian government has decided that what they want to do with textile waste is burn it for energy. And you get 4.5 kilowatt hours per kilo textiles. But if you actually recycle, for example, cotton or polyester, you would save 95 or 60 kilowatt hours in the whole production cycle. So it's sort of, I don't know, you do the math. These are, of course, all new thoughts that are going on now with should we be better at repairing things, redesigning things, repossessing things, re-owning them? There was a Swedish designer, Otto von Busch, who he's set up a take-back sort of a vintage store idea, where he had people bring in their old clothing, but before they handed it in, they had to write down the story of the item that they handed in. Why had they bought it? What was the most special occasion they'd worn it in? What did the piece of clothing actually mean to them? And most of the people just walked back out again with the piece of clothing because they didn't want to give it away when they finally realized why they bought it and why it meant so much to them. So these are, of course, things that we have to think more about. Why are clothes important to us? And could designers work with these things? You have the new system of crowdsourcing where you're actually talking to your consumer about what they want from you, where you can show ideas to them and they can give feedback to you, what you actually want to them the designer to produce. You have modern mobile applications that could also follow up the clothing that you actually sell, so that the designer could say, well, you've had this piece of clothing for about half a year now, what about coming back in and we'll fix it or update it or do something fun and new with it, or that type of thing is part of the new world for actually keeping clothing longer, updating it, making it more meaningful. And you have the whole thing with social medias, of course. I don't know if you followed Livia Firth's blog on Vogue, where she had this thing that she wanted to find for every red carpet event she went to. She wanted to find a sustainable dress. At this point, she chose Lila Hafsi, who's a Norwegian designer. And she, of course, then writes up the designer and what's behind it and why it was important to her to actually wear that item of clothing, which again goes back into giving more meaning into the actual item of clothing. It's not just something you pull off the rack, take 3, pay for 2. So in NICE, we try to follow up a lot of these things we do monthly newsletters that you can sign up for. We are, of course, on Facebook when it comes to social medias. Everybody else is, so why not us? And we have, besides some of the things we have with the Code of Conduct and our 10-year plan, we have a website. And the thought here being that having a website gives you a way of interacting, of finding things, having it as a resource. So it's both consumer-oriented and for professionals. It's, as you see, there's a guide in Norwegian down there. That's because the Norwegian government paid for most of this. So we decided to give them that back. And this sort of just gives a very quick explanation of how the page or how the site is operative, so that you look at the different areas. If you're a consumer, you go to the one side. If you're a professional, you go to the other, and then you have the different areas in the life cycle that you can click on, and then they actually give you a lot of information in that area. Transport being, as is, the smallest one right now, production being the huge one, where there are a lot of issues going on. And for the consumer, the use and prolonged use and the end of life and recycling areas, of course, more important for them, but they also have information about production and what they might want to ask about when they go to the store. In Norway, there's actually a law that if the store doesn't answer you within 2 weeks, they can get a fine. If you have a specific question about how something was produced and the store doesn't give you a satisfactory answer, they can be fined, which is not much fun for the producer if they can't give a proper answer. So that's more or less. I think I'll just close this so you don't have to be bored and see the whole thing. But we also have news items that we post all the time. We have our featured projects, where a wool project and the textile waste as a resources. We have different resources. We link up to other people, other organizations. Our forum sort of was hacked a little bit too much, so it's now Facebook instead of there. We love that people contact us and give us feedback and come up with ideas about what they are doing, because just posting ideas about what other designers are doing, what different companies are doing in this area is so productive and so informative for others, because just hearing about what's going on out there is probably the most important thing that we have. So thank you.
Thanks, Tone. Actually, I'll be building off a lot of what Tone was saying. So, and I'll try not to overlap. But thanks, guys, for coming. Actually, I'll be speaking mostly about Source for Style, which is a new venture that I'm doing with my business partner, who I think is in the back, Benita. Yeah, so Benita's right back there. But what we'll be highlighting today is a little bit more about what the platform is, how it actually works, and the idea of building infrastructure to make sustainable design possible, which is our mission. So we call this the Sourcing Chronicles. it was interesting because Benita and I came together back in end of September of 2009, and it was after I just did my book tour with Style Naturally, and she was in an enterprise called BBMG, which was doing more like social media and marketing. But Benita's background is actually sourcing artisanal products and creating them for groups like Whole Foods, Levi's, and I had been sourcing for some projects for Payless Shoe Source, Portico Home, recently with an eyewear label. And what we found out just from being in the industry was that no matter how big or small you are, sourcing is a pain point. We did some market research early on in October of 2009 and found out that designers spend up to 85% of their time sourcing and not designing, which is kind of weird because you're called designers. They're not called sourcers. And it becomes even more of a problem when you're sourcing more sustainable because the materials are not easy to find. They're not necessarily credible or verifiable. You get a lot of the marketing end of it and less of the meat. So, we figured that if we could actually turn this on its head and have the designers actually spend 15% of their time sourcing and 85% of their time designing, that will actually make sustainable design become more possible because designers will be innovating as opposed to worrying about where the stuff is coming from and how to actually verify it. So we went and created, and we just actually launched this on October 4th, so just about 3 weeks ago. It's called Source for Style, and it's a business-to-business online marketplace that allows designers and retail brands to search and source more sustainable materials at the click of a button. So, part of what we were looking at is there's a ton of directories out there, but you still actually have to get on the phone with the supplier. They may speak a different language than you, and you're asking that supplier the same question that they may get over and over again. What are your material offerings? What are your minimums? What are your lead times? What are your ship times? So our goal was, how do we create a virtual trade show online? Essentially a 365-day-a-year trade show where you open up the inventory of every supplier. So if a supplier has 100 materials, how can we open up the inventory of those 100 materials and literally tag them with the information about that particular material? So what is its lead time? What is its ship time? How do you tell a sustainability story for that material as well as the company? So the way that the site works, and by the way, we went through the process of like what we are and what we're not. We are truly virtual. We do inventory swatches, but we are not a showroom. And we get calls all the time and people are like, can we come to your showroom and feel your fabrics? But the way that we've created it is that you could go to Source for Style. We launched private beta on May 25th. We brought on about 100 designers for the first 2 months to actually practice on the site, see what they thought. And we launched this October 4th at the House of Lords in London. And you could actually go in, you could type into the search bar what you're looking for. So it could be sheep's wool, it could be organic cotton, it could be bark cloth, which is one of the ones that we're going to show you now. So we haven't implemented the tabbable browsing, but that will be coming within a week. And essentially you get, this is the SKU. So this is what you would see if you go to a trade show and there's an actual material sitting there. And you could see that you could actually buy the material. So you could buy sample yardage, you could buy production yardage, you could add it to your virtual swatch book, which is essentially your swatch book online or your wish list. And this is essentially the description of the product. So you could see the bark cloth has a little story. We implemented extreme zoom photography. So this is a 100 millimeter macro lens zoom, so you could actually really see the fiber of the material. So this is probably even more than what you would see with the naked eye, but we wanted to give people a feel for the material. So when you're sourcing, it's almost like a discovery tool. And plus you have to come up with a way that you could virtually communicate this to a designer who oftentimes loves to feel this stuff. So part of what we were doing is like, how can we actually showcase a material online better and allow that designer, if he or she wants to feel the product, to be able to order that swatch so that she could get it, or he or she could get it within a few days, and then could decide on whether production or sampling yardage is of interest. So we also have sustainability specs, and Tuna actually made a great point about some of the internal environmental assessment tools that are currently out on the market. And she had mentioned made by, if you remember, and she mentioned the Eco Index. Source for Style has been part of the Eco Index for the last 2 years. It started about 3 years ago, and we're pretty much convinced that it's going to be the internal environmental assessment tool for the industry. It probably is about 2 to 3 years out from becoming a consumer fronting label, but the reason why it's definitely different from all the other ones out there is because it had a community that came together that really was an open source, transparent community, brought on nonprofits, basically anybody who wanted to be a part of it can be. And they do have a beta site that you could actually practice with your own products. That is opened. And so we actually built in part of the Eco Index in the back end. And basically what it is that it goes through a series of sustainability questions, and we've added other questions on top of that that are like more hot button industry topics. So in the case of wool, we ask what type of wool it is, because it makes so much of a difference. Whether you have partial control, full control over the animal husbandry issues. Type of wool meaning like if it's alpaca, where the alpaca is coming from, if it's sheep, where the sheep is coming from, if it's cashmere, because even on a micro level, those wool from those animals have their own issues and challenges associated with it. So we try to get a more full and transparent, robust approach to sustainability for the design for each material. Now, I have to say that it is difficult getting all of that information and getting suppliers to even find out all of that information, because some of them actually they might have no control or partial control over where their fibers or yarns are coming from. But we want to be able to showcase that out to the community. So it's less about whether you're so good or you're so evil with your fiber production and more about transparency, which has definitely been a buzzword within the industry over the past 5 years, but it hasn't been, but I think mainly in the business realms. But for us, it's about telling a story in a way that is really meaningful for the designer, and something that is really easy to digest. So we created these sustainability attributes on the left-hand side. This is actually 4 of the 6 that we created. And on the furthest left is vertically integrated, handmade, fair trade, and a crafts preservation. We also have something for organic and recycled. In the textile specs, this is what normal designers want to know all the time, like what is the materiality of the product, the weight. We also have it in ounces per yard squared, and it could be translated into GSM, because we have about 25 suppliers on our site and over 1,000 materials from 12 different countries. And people weigh and measure their products differently. We have weave, width, fabric direction, fabric repeat if there's a print pattern, colors and dyeing, whether it's prepared for dye or prepared for print. You could download by end of November, we'll have a premium level membership where you could actually download materials tests and sustainability tests. And then, of course, lead and ship time. So if you want to get the product and you're in Norway and it's coming from the US, what is the lead and ship time coming from there? Do they even ship there? And a little bit more about each supplier. And then this is the most exciting part, and the one that we're continually working on with our suppliers. So our suppliers actually have artistic license to tell their own stories, which is quite funny, considering that I don't think that we have one normal supplier on our site. But we're actually helping them tell their story, and this should be a lorem ipsum. It was actually from another place, so if you're reading about the Pradhan, this is actually bark cloth, which is what we had showed previously, so it's this piece right here. And it's actually hand-pounded bark from Uganda, and it's a more novel material. It's principally from Masaka, which is in the south-central part of Uganda. And it comes from the Ficus natalensis tree, which is basically a fig tree. And you could get this also in the Philippines, but it's a traditional cloth and a ceremonial cloth from Uganda. And what they actually do is they take, you'll see in this one, they have, this is not the fig tree. The fig tree is right here, and this is the banana trees. So what they actually do is they take a banana stem and it's almost like a sword, and they slice the bark off the tree, which actually usually when you slice bark off a tree, it usually kills it or damages it. This tree doesn't get damaged. You could do it at least once a year. And then they take the banana leaves and they wrap it around so there's no fungal infections. And the more that you take care of the trees, the better and high production value it is. So they strip that bark off the tree and they literally hand pound it with a huge hammer. So it's pretty labor intensive. And actually, this material was really popular in the 1960s for home decor. But you see a revitalization and an interest in how do we actually create design for development? How do we get really cool stories out? So Source for Style takes in part like the ethical and social nature of it, as well as the environmental nature of it as our pillars. And we're interested in working with sustainable suppliers who are quite large to ones that, like the bark cloth, that are more novel. So these are just samples of our macro lens photography of the bark cloth, just to give you an example of how exquisite it actually is. And it's pretty much used for accessories, home interior design. We've seen it on notebooks, shoes, accessories, and most recently, at least this one version, we ended up getting it sourced. You probably know this guy, Christian Siriano. He was one of the winners from Project Runway. So just this past season, he actually wanted a more novel material. So we were able to find it on Source for Style, and he picked bark cloth, and he put it in for his accessories and his belt. So I actually just spent some time with him today. And he's going into production with the belts, and which we're pretty excited about. And he's probably going to get them on to, he said he has some celebrity clientele that would actually like to wear the bark belt. So you can imagine it's like a girl going down the runway, but having somebody on the street wear a bark cloth belt and then be able to tell that story really enriches a brand. And I think that many brands are now wanting to find those stories. And it's not just the overall green story any longer. It's something that is a bit more novel. It's a bit more precious to that particular brand that relates to its identity. And of course, I could speak longer about like the Eco Index and how it actually implements into the brand line, but we'll save that for any of your questions if you have, because I meant this to be just a more of an introductory level of Source for Style. And I think if they could turn the sound on right now. But this is actually just a fresh version. We really want to have a new way of looking at sustainability and design for Source for Style, and I think that part of it is inspiring not just sustainable designers and being able to build the infrastructure for them, but also encourage new designers who are always afraid to dip their toe in the water because they didn't know where to start. And so we really feel Source for Style is a place where people could come and source materials no matter what your design criteria is. And you could decide for the designer for himself or herself whether they want to go a more ethical route, whether they want to source more locally. And we want to take up like a fun approach to the matter. So we've just in the early stages launched a little video. Go ahead. And the editing is still raw and rough, but it's called The Cutting Edge, and it's basically sustainable design news in 60 seconds, or something like that, because it's not 60 seconds. But it's a little bit more Talk Soup meets CNN, so it's a way to communicate issues in a more fun way. So I'll just play that for you now. This is Summer Rayne Oakes from Source for Style, and you're watching The Cutting Edge, sustainable design news in 60 seconds. Yes, it's true that there are no wild mulberry silk caterpillars left in this world. They are all fat, happy, and domesticated. Well, maybe fat and domesticated, but not happy. Most often after the Bombyx mori caterpillars have spun their cocoons, they are placed in large vats of boiling water.
Al dente.
Why do those evil, cruel meanies do that? Well, it turns out that as a caterpillar emerges to fulfill its life stage as a moth, it secretes an alkali fluid that dissolves the silk, which not only leaves a slight stain, but also breaks the silk filament.
Surprisingly, the silkworm spins up to 1 mile or 1.6 kilometers of filament in one cocoon. If the filament isn't broken, it can yield 1,000 yards or 914 meters of usable silk. Ooh. There are wild or piece silk varieties, which means the silk moth is allowed to emerge, but the quality of the material is completely different. Because the silk filaments are broken into smaller components, the silk is not wound onto spools, but woven more like cotton. So how much silk does a silkworm silk if a silkworm could silk? Well, that's the crazy part, because these mulberry munching critters are ravenous. 1 acre of mulberry trees produce enough foliage to feed silkworms to create 178 pounds or 81 kilograms of cocoons. That unravels into 35 pounds or 16 kilograms of raw silk. Ooh. And since you need about 5,500 silkworms to produce 2.2 pounds or 1 kilogram of silk, that means you have 88,000 caterpillars munching away to make those 35 pounds. Now talk about a big appetite for some pretty precious fiber.
So that's the cutting edge. It's just a little bit to be able to describe issues around silk, which some folks may not even know. And we were working with a brand recently, and they had asked us about silk, and they said, you know what, we want a piece silk, but we want it in a crepe de chine. And it's a great example of you actually can't get a piece silk in a crepe de chine. A crepe de chine is has those filaments where the continuous filament, which means the silkworm has to be boiled, whereas the piece silk is carded and combed, as mentioned. So it kind of gives you that different quality of silk. So you actually can't physically get a crepe de chine in a piece silk. So it's about creating a conversation and maybe like a little laugh around how sustainability and design is a serious issue, but doesn't always have to be taken seriously. So thank you very much.
For style, for the website, you mentioned you have 25 companies from 12 countries involved in it. Do you personally go to each of those companies and inspect their claims to sustainability and eco-friendliness yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually started with 25 suppliers that we've had relationships with or that are renowned in the industry for their sustainability criteria. And, Does this work? Yep. What we're actually not is a certification body, and we make that pretty clear on the site for those who read, and more of a vetting system. So for instance, and excuse me for not actually going through this, but it's a little bit daunting, but part of the questions that we ask, so if we say, are you certified organic along the supply chain? If so, where? And upload that digital reference of your certification in our backend. So we actually have a supplier backend where we ask for 245 points of information. So if a supplier says that they're organic but can't upload the organic certification, then we can't mention that it's organic, which is part of where the other memberships are coming in, where they can actually download those tests and those digital references. And these last few weeks, we've been actually doing quality control with our 30 suppliers, or 25 suppliers or so. And we just had some quick questions for them. Like for instance, one had an organic certification, and it was good until 2007. And we said, oh, can you actually upload the newer version of it? And she said, well, it's funny because we had fiber since 2007, so it would not be applicable. So there's certain things that there's just not as much due diligence as you can in those certain points, but it's the question of actually going, you have to kind of solve the first matter, which is designers can't find the stuff. So how do you actually crowdsource a community around around supplying that material and then doing your due diligence of actually vetting it to a certain degree where you could provide a more transparent system? And that's more of where we're hitting. But you bring up a really interesting point where we probably will eventually want to get into, which is quality assurance. And if somebody wants to say, okay, I want to go the extra mile and I want to get this Ecotech certified, or I want somebody on the ground, is there a shared partnership business model there where we could provide that service for the designer or the brand who's sourcing on our site? But I think it's important in building
really a sustainable business is to be able to scale it up in a way that's manageable for you and the team, and to really hit upon the points that are most important. But I would actually encourage you to take a look. We'll be talking more about our back end and the information that we upload from the suppliers. And I think the other point I'd like to make also with that too, which is kind of cool, is even though we ask them to upload the digital references, we ask kind of clever questions in a way that could give a fuller picture of the material. So for instance, I'll just provide an example of, like, if something is FSC certified, which is Forest Stewardship Council certified, and it's a wood product, and wood product could come from lyocell, it could come from rayon, it could come from pure wood, so like the bark cloth, it could come from wood buttons. So you have many different ways of like how you're using wood, and we ask if it's FSC certified. Then in the hot button industry topics that's beyond the Eco-Index, we ask where, you know, in addition to uploading that certification, we ask what country does it come from? Because as you know, even with certifications, there's different regulation issues. And it gives a clear idea as to what country it's coming from, because then you could do your due diligence that, you know, FSC certification is not maybe highly regulated in developing nations as it would be if you're getting it from the Nordic regions, for instance. So we try to get a deeper picture, and I don't think we've done, because we just launched, I don't think that we've done our due diligence of being able to tell that story as clearly as possible, but we are capturing that information in the back end. So it's a question for our team to be able to, how do we best explicate that to the designer coming to the site? But I think the critical point for us is being able to capture that data, ask the right questions, and the ones that are standard in the industry or going to be the leading edge in the industry, i.e. the Eco-Index, and then be able to communicate that is the second strategy. And then thirdly, looking into, after vetting, how do we actually then ensure that the suppliers are saying what they say they are. And we're doing that through asking them for digital references or all that other kind of stuff.
One of the new news items related to fashion and sustainability this year was that H&M has been reported to take things that haven't been sold and either bury them or slit them and throw them in dumpsters so they can't be reused. Which I teach at the Fashion Institute, so this is a great story. Our students love this one. I'm just wondering if like the huge Scandinavian box stores, H&M and anything else that's along the way there, are involved in your initiative, or are you in conversations with them, or is this kind of dumping of products so it physically can't be reused being addressed by?
When IKEA was confronted with that specific incident, they were highly embarrassed by it. I know. I read the follow-up in Women's Wear Daily, and evidently they blamed, in that case, it was the store manager that got most of the blame, because they said that they had systems that this was not supposed to happen at all. Whether that was true or not, one doesn't know. But I know specifically because we just had a big NICE conference in Copenhagen, and H&M sent 2 representatives there, and I asked them specifically about especially take-back issues. And one of the representatives told me that they have a white group that meets every single week that discusses sustainable issues. And on the table every single week is the issue of take-back and how to treat, you know, the surplus. Because one thing that has been discussed within the European Union is doing the same thing as they do with electronic things, that you know, the store that sells it actually has to take back the waste and treat it in some, you know, in a responsible way. And this has been on the table in the European Union, that they might actually pass a law that says that the big chains will have to take back the stuff and treat it in some responsible way. It hasn't happened yet, and it may be a ways off. But in France, they have a law now that says that if you do not have a system for the waste that you're actually creating when it comes to textiles, you have to pay a tax. And that tax goes to paying for the whole system of recycling and handling it. But if you have can prove that you have a system to handle it, then you don't have to pay the tax, which should be a good way of getting people to find or develop systems. So that I know that, for example, the stocking manufacturers, DIM, they now sell all their stockings with an envelope that is self-addressed back to the company with postage prepaid, so that when you're stocking, you were about to throw it into the bin, you put it in the envelope instead and then send it back to the factory, and then they have to handle, put it back into a good system. But to answer the other part of your question about H&M and IKEA being part of our initiative, H&M actually is very much involved, and they're on the main board that we have, and they have invested a lot in the Sustainable Fashion Academy, which is an initiative in Sweden that is developing courses for Nice too, so that they're putting things back because they know that they're out there and they can have their heads cut off within seconds because they're so big. And also IKEA is thinking in the same way, and they're thinking very much about doing return services, so that if anything that was bought in IKEA could be returned to their stores. They haven't implemented it yet, but they do have that in their long-term plan. In the back again.
Yeah, if you saw some of the criteria that we had for the fair trade, crafts preservation, so that's one of our pillars, and as per also Benita's background and some of my background is focusing on how do we develop market access to some of the more smaller or traditional crafts people that do really good material that could actually produce it for market. So yes, that is one of the principal pillars and criteria for the site too.
Is there any athletic brands who use wool? Yeah, I know Icebreaker. Well, you have one company called Ulvang. They use Australian merino wool, yes. And for the most part, that's been underwear, wool underwear. So it has been mostly Australian wool, yes. Yeah. So not Norwegian sourced, because since it is the coarser wool, actually what happened was that back in the 80s they stopped classifying it into the very, very fine lamb's wool, that type of wool which actually could probably be used for softer products, because they decided that why we're getting all this great wool from Australia, why bother, And those carpet guys in the UK, they need as much wool as they can get. So we'll just lump it all together and get rid of it and sell it out. So the finer wool, which it's actually there, it's just not being taken out. So that's part of one of the things that we're looking at is, can it be classified finer? Are there systems for that? And there's also actually a sheep breed that is a very old Norwegian sheep that has two types of wool the same way as a cashmere goat would have. But separating those two wool types is an expensive process, which is why mohair and those things are more expensive. But the question is, if you do it, and if you can do a good enough story around it so that people actually would ask for that type of wool, then there would be an economy in it, it would be a sustainable type of business. So maybe in about 5 years you'll be asking for spal wool, which is the name of the sheep.
Is there a
Yes, that's part of the thing, is doing the entire value chain, you know, down to the sheep farmer, and this, you know, really talking to them. So because actually what happens today to that specific wool is that it is destroyed. It's not sold or used for anything because they don't even filter out the really good wool. So there were lots of hands going up in the back there. Who wants to go first?
For Summer, how are you doing domestically in terms of mills, sustainable mills? Like how many mills do you guys
Oh gosh, I don't know if off the top of my head, but there are mills out there. They're principally, you have some out in California. You have a number of them in the Carolinas. You have some in New York and Pennsylvania, actually. You have fiber spinners in Alabama and Atlanta. So they're out there, and I wouldn't say that their business is booming. And I think that, you know, part of what we're doing with the site, and actually what we found out, interestingly enough, in private beta, is that we cater to designers all over the world, but a lot of our designers are US based, and more designers want to be purchasing within the region. And it's kind of one of those interesting things, because you have a global market, and sourcing locally means one thing for the U.S. designer, means something different for the U.K. designer. So it's like you have to find all those folks in between. But in regards to the U.S., there is an audience like just that wants to source more locally. The reality is you can't get a lot of the materials that you want in your design collection locally. So you kind of have to decide that as a designer. And you know, as a designer, you think that you could get sometimes material all the time, any material. And we've seen requests of like, I want to get this piece silk from the US, and you know, you won't be able to get it unless somebody imports it in and then resells it. So we're trying to actually go directly to the manufacturer, directly to the supplier, to keep the cost down low, so that there's no like middleman in between to put up a higher retail to designer. But that also means educating the designer about whether it's coming in from a different country or whether it's coming in from that, you know, the country that you live in. And there's all sorts of complications that come with that, because, you know, and I don't know if we haven't done a little bit more poking around, but a lot of times when designers want to source more locally, it's not because they have a penchant for being local, but it's because they could get the material faster. They don't have to deal with customs. It's already a landed price. There's no duties, there's no taxes, all that other kind of stuff that comes with sourcing internationally. But the downside is that you can't always get the fabric that you want. So yes, there are mills out there. Off the top of my head, I don't even know how many we've reached out to, but there's definitely, you know, probably like 20 or 30 on our list that we've been looking for. And kind of in between there, you have yarn suppliers and everything else in between along the supply chain. But yeah, it's a dwindling industry. So the more, you know, grassroots nature that independent designers and brands actually want to go to the mills in the U.S., the better. And actually, a lot of our brands here, Urban Outfitters, Anthropologie, work with U.S. Manufacturers for that reason, that they could get the product to the market much quicker than having something shipped over by sea from China, for instance. So interesting dynamic.
Just want to add one thing. We were out shopping yesterday in New York. I wonder why, but no, this was San Francisco, I think. But I noticed the sign that said Italian merino, and I was sort of stumped. There are no Italian merino sheep that actually sell. Their wool is not sold for clothing. I know that for a fact. So I had to email my expert in the International Wool Textile Organization. I said, what do they mean by Italian merino? And he said, well, of course it's Australian merino, but it's spun in Italy.
He's got to hear your chest and thick accent.
Just another question for Summer. Wondering about quantities. Like if you're dealing with a big-time designer and they want to buy in mass quantity and kind of sustain that as a long-term aspect of their design, what does it vary? I'm assuming based on producer and
Yeah, and it's a great and interesting point. So part of what we require on the site is to tell your minimums and the price points if you buy at a higher minimum. And it varies for supplier. It varies for textile, but mainly by supplier. So, you know, some of our suppliers have like 1 yard minimums, and you could just get a yard and be fine. Some of them have like 500 yard minimums, and then they could do sampling yardage, but it's at a cost, and it's usually 1.5 times more the cost, because they have to actually cut the roll, and they don't always like to cut the roll because then the roll's cut and they can't sell the roll. So and for all various different reasons. But yeah, so we encourage people to buy, obviously, with the minimum, because then the supplier won't, if the supplier is like selling it and it says I have a 100 yard minimum and you put 99 yards, or you've put like 10 yards, then probably won't happen. We're still in the process of actually, I think we're in the process of still being able to, if somebody puts in 100 yards, it won't let you in the product page. But if that's not working, we're about getting it there. Of course, launching a virtual online site, you always have technology bugs. But yeah, it's by supplier. It is focused on their minimums, and we encourage people to understand that, because suppliers for different reasons have different minimums. But oftentimes, if it's in stock, they'll sell just a yard. And which brings up an interesting point about sometimes designers getting into this space. Just because it's out of stock doesn't mean you can't purchase it. Sometimes the supplier actually needs the money, half the money up front, to be able to run that. Having inventory means extra cost for that supplier, especially if there's no demand for the material. So if you see that it's a 50 yard minimum for not in stock materials and you want 50 yards, you could actually put that production yardage into production. Does that make sense? So that's, you know, one of the things. We actually had an out of stock button, and people wouldn't even click on it because they wouldn't even go to the next page to see the minimums. But you could actually probably make the minimums in some cases. So we've taken that out so that people could actually view the material and see if they can meet the minimums to get it back in stock.
So to follow up on that, I work now for an Indian, a nonprofit organization working with artisans in India. And one of the problems that we have in bringing some products to the States with some of the products is that, for example, things happen like it's rainy for far too long in the foothills of the Himalayas, and the black dye we needed to make that, 20 series of shawls. They couldn't dry the yarn, and there's two sides of that, which I think one side is really lovely, that's sort of life, and that's part of the process of creating a product. They also, need for yardage. I'm sure you're going to come up with, well, I don't know your suppliers, but I'm sure that will come up at some point, though maybe not, depending on who your suppliers are. But then there's that other side that's very frustrating about that, where you have people that get frustrated when they can't get the product that they wanted. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, how you're dealing with that, if that is even a problem.
Yeah, Benita would actually be one of the best people to answer this question, and I almost don't even want to answer it for her, because she's gone through a lot of that of her first enterprise is Mercado Global, working with artisan groups within Guatemala, and then now we're working with a lot of Indian suppliers. And you have everything from tsunamis to higher rains to earthquakes, and in the end, shit happens. And I think part of our challenge is being able to communicate that. A large part of this site is actually communication, which, again, like I said, we actually just launched a site, and part of it is how do you source more fair trade materials? What are the challenges that come with that? And as a buyer, you really need to have an understanding and a devotion for purchasing from these groups of folks, because if something like that happens, you have to be understanding. Much in the same way that now, manufacturers and brands go out and they visit organic cotton farmers, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that you just can't get organic cotton on demand, that we have to, provide 10 years commitment to these folks so that they could transition out from conventional cotton into basic, into transitional, into organic cotton to be able to purchase that. And that's what the farmers needed. And, you know, so the challenge for us and the challenge to communicate that to buyers on our site who may be sophisticated buyers or not is, you know, when you purchase fair trade materials, what are those challenges? You know, how do you want to be devoted to this group of individuals who honestly in many ways could pull at your heartstrings, that in a way, and the fact that you are devoted to them more even in times of need allows you to you know, tell that story through your brand and have that wearer wear that. So if you have any other questions, I would encourage you to talk to Benita also in the back. And I know that we're doing these Source for Style sustainable design workshops, and one of the things that Benita will probably lead is sourcing fair trade and just, you know, her intimate relationship with that and sourcing groups from all around the world. So yeah, thanks for that question. It's a very interesting one.